this video, I'll be ranking all of the fights in Shibuya. I will not be including the point where Yuta comes in because that is the Itadori extermination. And we'll start off with number 14 is Mei Mei versus Ibina, and Ibina gets one shot by Mei Mei. And the biggest highlight is we get some dynamic pose from Mei Mei, and that's all too much about the fight. There wasn't too much and it was a quick work from Mei Mei. And we'll move on to number 13. So number 13 is Nobara and Nanami versus Haruto. I think this fight was good because it shows how strong grade 1 sorcerers can be, and we got a nice team up between Nobara and Nanami. We also get to floor one of the most annoying characters, and I think it was a great moment before the calm of the storm. I think Nobara showed good moments in the fight, and when Nanami came in to save her at the mid section of the fight, we got to show the showcase between how strong a grade 2 sorcerer is compared to a grade 1 sorcerer is, and with Nanami completely overwhelming him. And now we got to introduction to one of the craziest curse techniques with miracles. Haruto can store miracles, shown with the white lines on his face, and this allows him to escape near-death situations. However, they have to be from memories that he's accumulated through his life. So for example, if he stores something like 444 or things that are akin to miracle light, he stores them under his face, and then they will use up every time he's in a near-death situation. And I thought it was an interesting ability for a very annoying character, and that will sum up my thoughts on Nobara and Nanami versus Haruto. Number 12. So number 12 would be Yuji versus the Grasshopper, and I mean, we get to see how strong Yuji had grown through the events of what had happened in the first arc with Mahito. We got to see him completely overpower the Grasshopper, and I mean, the Grasshopper at first tried to give him a sneak maneuver. However, even he realized himself that he can't use fakes to overwhelm such a big gap in strength, and I thought it was a good moment for Itadori, and I liked the conclusion. It was a quick fight as well. And now we'll go to number 11. And number 11 is Ino versus Ogani. And this fight was amazing because of the appearance of Toji. The fight itself wasn't too much interest to me, and we got Ino obviously overpowering Ogani and his grandson. But when we get to the point with Toji being summoned and using his heavenly restriction body to take control over the soul, we not only one, got great indications of things that potentially could be foreshadowed in the future, two, the more greater explaining of how dangerous heavenly restriction is to be able to take control over a mind control body ability. And 3, we got the GOAT himself, Toji, back, and listen, that introduction was beautiful. He completely overwhelmed everyone there, and it was amazing. I think the fact that he overwhelmed his body, and he had that little snarky comment saying, "Hey, I'm special, right?" And I think it was beautiful because Toji in this whole Shibuya arc was beautiful, and I think even having his short introduction into Shibuya, he had his character story fleshed out and completely done. I think there's nothing more we needed of Toji, and when you get to the eventual fight with Dagon and then the fight against Megami, it gave us a nice way of having carnage and concluding with Megami and Toji having a nice little interaction. I think this fight was beautiful, and I think I like the fight more because of the implications it had for the rest of the story rather than the fight itself, with it being very quick. Now number 10, and then Megami and Yuji versus Arkaza. And I think this fight was hella cool because one, his ability, the curse's ability of inverse, was insane, and I think it showed more indication to why Gojo's such a big problem. Him being able to negate such a crazy curse technique such as inverse, it just shows some of the direction and creativity Gege did with some of these curse abilities. However, Megami and Yuji teamed up was beautiful. I think Megami using his intellect, Yuji showing his strength, him being able to throw cards, and them being able to bounce off each other and have successful teamwork to deal with an annoying curse technique such as inverse. I think they easily negated his ability, and it was a nice little team up, and I think the fight panels were great, and it was one of my most interesting fights in terms of a team up between the two. I think the fact that we got our two main casts fighting together was beautiful, and I think it nicely moves on to number 9. So number 9 is going to be Mei Mei versus the smallpox deity. So Mei and her brother, who obviously gets trapped in the smallpox deity domain expansion. I think this fight was great because one, we got to see Mei Mei's ability of the Hawk ability, which is insane, and we now know that Gojo so far is the only person to have survived her ability. We also got to see her brother use a simple domain and the ability in the relationship we have and how Mei Mei exploits even everybody close to her. The fact that she was even ecstatic for the fact that she could cash in on a favor from Gojo speaks volumes to her character, and I think her character is interesting, and it gives us more indication to how people can team up against non-domains. I think the smallpox deity domain is insane, and the fact that you get trapped in this tombstone, and then when you get hit, it has a countdown to 3 seconds, which you would then get affected by smallpox disease. I think this speaks volumes, and maybe this is going to be something more of Kenjaku and his arsenal of curses that we'll see later on in the story. However, more of that, I think her ability and kind of collaboration with her brother shows she's a dangerous individual. How too much effort overpowered a special grade and showed how dangerous her and her psyche is. Even Kenjaku showing some sort of recognition for her after the conclusion of the fight shows that Mei Mei is an interesting character and someone not to be slept on, and I think it was a great fight and somebody we got to see more indication in the story. Now number 8, and this is Megumi versus Toji. I think Toji's conclusion was beautiful. The fact that Toji came down and they had their small fight with Megumi. We got one thing, him saying how his ability is relative or even stronger to that of the three-finger Sukuna of what we've seen, and I think it was just highlighting how strong Toji was even in his brief indications in these fights. I think even when you get to the conclusion and he stops himself and then kills himself and asks what is your name, and he finds out that his name is Fushiguro, not Zenin, I thought it was a beautiful conclusion, and his even comment of good for you and him smiling was beautiful. I think it done everything to tie in Toji as a character, as well as it gave us more indication to him actually caring for Megumi. At that point of view, we hadn't known if he really cared for Megumi as his son, but we see that he named him Megumi, 1 for blessing and 2 to give him to a clan who would be able to make best use of his abilities and hope he has a better life. I think it was beautiful and I loved the fight. Even though Megumi is still confused, I think he may have some indication to understand who that person was, but regardless of that, I thought it was great to see Toji see his son again. Number 7, and this is everybody versus Kenjaku and Urame. I thought this was insane. I mean, at the climax after everything that had happened, this was one of the most unexpected things that was to happen. First, we get to see Kenjaku use his ability of maximum Uzumaki. We get the conclusion of Mahito being sucked up by the Uzumaki pause. We also see Kenjaku as his final big bad boss of the CUlling games, and we get to see Urame, who is somebody who is in unison with obviously Sukuna and have an insane ability of her ice ability. I think the way she was about to kill everybody with freezing everyone and only leave Yuji as the remaining survivor, and if it wasn't for the new introduction as people such as Yuki, it would have been very difficult for our main cast to survive. I think not only did this fight be very short and just demonstrate how much power Kenjaku and the rest of them have, it set up the now current arc that we're in the CUlling games, and it showed us a small brief indication of someone such as Urame, who I think will be a big component as we go into the future. Over, it gave us a good side of Choso turning to the good side, and now we'll finally see Choso and Yuji having a better dynamic potentially in the future, and I think it was a great moment in the story that concluded the events of Shibuya. Number 6, so Dagon versus Toji and the Jujutsu Sorcerers. This fight was insane, and I mean, we got Nobito, who I think was the MVP of this fight before Toji's appearance. Nobito was actually overpowering this special grade in Dagon and showed great levels of feats. I think Nobito, Nanami and Maki unfortunately was lacking behind in this fight, but Nobito and Nanami showed good combinations in dealing with Dagon. I think Dagon showed good feats of him as a special grade and managed to take on obviously this onslaught by multiple people and use different abilities that were crazy with his water abilities, and even when we get to his activation of the domain expansion. But before we get to that, we got to learn something interesting with him being able to do the seal on his body even though his arms were blown away from Nobito. There was more indication to even someone such as right now in Hakari, who potentially doesn't have his hands, would be able to still make the hand seals through different means, but that's just a different indication. And regardless of that, I think we got some interesting things with even Megumi using his domain expansion, and we got to see another usage of the tug of war. We got to see that the reason why Dagon and his abilities ended up being hindered was the fact that Megumi's tug of war prevented the domain expansion from continuing. We also got to see how Nobito and Nanami's durability is great, with the fact that they lasted a minute of the death swarm from Dagon. There is some things which I will respect Dagon in the fact that he did split his forces into 70-30 to deal with the respective people. However, I think it was great indication, and even Maki has some good usage for when she finally got her playful cow tool. However, the peak of this fight is when Toji gets introduced, and I think we get more indication to even people who try to say Toji can come into barriers. It shows that that is not necessarily true. We get one, Megumi reasoning allowing Toji to come in is because one, he knew the shape of where the barrier entered with him coming into the domain. So then this allowed Toji to come up and prevent obviously everyone else from trying to escape, and then we got to the peak moment of Toji completely outclassing Dagon. Obviously Dagon was tired and he can't use the domain expansion, but Dagon was completely overpowered, and I think it was beautiful. The moments we saw, and then even Naruto coming in at the brink to prevent Dagon from potentially having a comeback, and then you get the conclusion with Toji completely massacring Dagon, and I think that was peak. I mean, the fact that we got to see Toji back in the story, he gave us a great moment, and I think that whole fight and choreography from the start to finish was beautifully done. I think it's a very underrated fight in my opinion. Our number 5, and this is Gojo versus the Disaster Curses. This is when we saw the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer show why he's the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. The title drop of when they said after he uses domain expansion and they say this is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in the world was so cold, and that shit had me have goosebumps. I mean, Gojo, his trash talking, calling Hajime a weed, him laughing about the fact that they decided they could beat him. I mean, it showed everything that we love about Gojo, his cockiness, his ability to overpower people. We got to see him just showcase why he is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, and it was amazing. I mean, Jogo and them also gave us indication to other ways to counter broken abilities with using domain amplification. However, we got to show how Gojo is stronger than just even using his abilities. He was packing up Hanami with just his curse energy. And the fact that Gojo is just so far superior that he works best when he's on his own, it showcases to why the eventual conclusion had to happen. But one thing I think is interesting is now we got to see that Gojo did his domain expansion in 0.2 seconds. It's also just an indication that Gojo can probably time how quick he does his domain expansion, and he could potentially do it even quicker than the 0.2 seconds that he did. However, I think one thing that's interesting is that he caught them and managed to destroy the idol transfigured humans, and I think the fact that they were trying to test his psyche, for 99% of the time there is no counter to Gojo. However, when we get to the fact that Gojo then ends up getting sealed, and which was the biggest plot point in the start of Shibuya, it becomes even more impactful because of the fact that he became distracted with seeing Geto in another body. We get to finally see Kenjaku revealed and who was this individual behind the brain of Geto's body, and I think the fact that this narrative led to all the chaos that happened in Shibuya, even Gojo flexing on the disaster curses, and then the eventual conclusion with Kenjaku sealing Gojo, I think it was just peak, and it was some of the best moments in Shibuya and some of my favorite moments in the manga in general. It was just insanity, and it came up back to back hype moments. Number 4, and this is Sukuna vs Jogo. So this is Sukuna first rampage, and listen, this is exactly what we wanted to see. His first introduction, he tells everyone to bow down and their heads are too high. And then Jogo tries to bargain with him, and we end up with the conclusion with Sukuna saying, if you can hit me once, I will agree to your demands. And Jogo did not hit Sukuna once. Did not just not hit Sukuna once. He got completely mollywalked by Sukuna, and it showed why Sukuna was such a dangerous individual. His cockiness, him being disrespectful, the quote where he says the moon makes it look nice to see how pathetic you are. I was like, nah, this guy is the GOAT. And I was like, listen, this was some of the most hype moments I've read in the manga. The fact that he was screaming, what are you doing, Curse Spirit? Even Jogo bringing out the maximum meteor, giving us another indication to maximum technique. The part where Sukuna is with Panda and the other people telling them not to move, and then he waits to the last second, then they all move. I mean, the moments were just hype after hype, and it gave us a huge, crazy moments in Shibuya. I mean, it came out of nowhere because we were anticipating this eventual Sukuna coming out, but the fact that it came out like this and he went on this rampage, I think it was perfect. And when we get to the ending conclusion where he obviously uses the same fire technique to overpower Jogo, and we get our first potential indication of him talking in the curse realm with them. We saw Jogo, Hanami and Dagon all together, and they all seem to be going part, and we get that touching moment with Jogo's conclusion where Sukuna says, stand proud, you are strong. I thought it was a nice conclusion to Jogo, and it also gave us different mindsets to Sukuna, his mindset towards humans and curses. He's of the mindset that you should burn all of that away and focus on yourself to becoming the top, whereas we got a nice POV of Jogo trying to become the new humans, and I think it was beautiful, wholesome moments at the spite of a complete, absolute massacre from Sukuna. Number 3, and this is Choso versus Yuji. The art in this one was beautiful. I mean, the panel where we get them in the bathroom scene was just peak. I think Gege was in his bag. And listen, we got to finally see blood manipulation used to its maximum. I mean, we saw a brief indication of Kamo using it, but Choso, with his abilities of a death painting, he was able to maximize it, and this fight was gritty and insane. I think Yuji showed great moments, and obviously with the help of Mekamaru being able to drag him into the bathroom scene, I think the usage of blood manipulation was beautiful. His usage of the blood meteorite, his ability to even counteract Yuji when we finally got to a point where Yuji supposedly had overpowered Choso, and we saw Yuji lose this battle. I mean, it was unexpected to see Yuji actually lose to Choso, but it set up perfectly with the death painting and the connection between Choso and Yuji. And I think furthermore, the fight was beautiful. I mean, I was just reading it back to back, just confused at where this fight was going. And I think blood manipulation is one of the most interesting curse techniques. His ability to use blood and attack his opponents, and not only that, his versatility is one of the scariest that we've seen with using multiple blood abilities. The fact that he can also poison the individual. Regardless of that, I think there was good moments for Itadori, and I mean, his diving kick was some of the hype moments that we've seen. One of my favorite fights in Jujutsu Kaisen, and it was just beautifully done. Number 2, and this is the best fight in Jujutsu Kaisen in my opinion. Listen, the one I have at number 1 is my favorite. However, this is the best fight based on narratively, is the best fight in terms of the hype moment, in terms of what came after the story. And like I said, narratively, the parallels between Yuji and Mahito is peak writing, and it was when Gege was in his bag. I think the story closed in JJK's current best antagonist in Mahito, and it concluded nicely with his story. I mean, the irony of him toying with people such as Junpei and him ended up being toying by Kenjaku was poetic. You got the big moments of Nobara and Nanami's death, which was shocking. We got how creative Mahito and scary he was, with him continuously developing and using things such as Black Flash. He ended up using Black Flash, which was a big shock to me, and then he finally developed his final form with Mahito, which was insane. We also got Todo and Yuji's dynamic, and listen, Todo's introduction made me scream, I won't lie to you. That was one of the most beautiful moments, and I was so hyped to see, because at that moment of time, we saw Yuji basically at the brink of his character. He had been shattered, he lost all his resolve, he was in a situation where we were thinking, what on earth can Yuji do to pick up from this bad situation? And then Todo comes and it restores the faith as us as the fans with all the losses that happened, and it gave Yuji that final boost to finally get over the hump against Mahito. I mean, the parallels Mahito talked about, that I am you and you are me, I think these were beautiful. And even at the end when Yuji accepts that yes, I am you, but he is going to overpower him every time he sees, it was 10 out of 10. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, this is the best fight narratively. The only reason I have the fight ahead is for some personal reasons, and we'll get into that. But I think the best thing is we got to see Yuji find even more resolve and accepting his place as a cog in the system. He's become into a situation now we're going to get even more character development, and I hope in the CUlling games we'll see that even expanded on, even though we briefly saw that in the fight against Higuruma. But I think it's a great moment for our main cast, and it was one of the moments which shattered us so much as fans. I mean, Mahito did everything he did as a villain, and I think he's one of the most hated ones, and because of that he did well in what he was supposed to do. He posted a juxtaposition between him and the main cast, and as well as he was further shown the irony of his situation, which was done beautifully to the setting up for the next potential best villain in Kenjaku. And number 1, Sukuna vs Mohuroga. The reason this is number 1, and even though I have said Yuji Todo and Nobara vs Mahito is the best narratively, this is the one that caught me the most off guard and I had the most hype, and is one of my favorite manga fights in general. Sukuna's rampage was perfection. We finally saw what Megumi wanted to summon after all these times in the story, and Mohuroga did not disappoint. I understand that Sukuna completely slapped up Mohuroga. However, he showed us how dangerous and scary and why the previous 10 Shadows techniques and previous 6 Eyes users could not defeat Mohuroga. His ability of adapting to every phenomenon is crazy, and it shows indications to why, if Sukuna was not there, would Mohuroga have soloed the rest of Shibuya? Potentially, because of his ability of adapting to any phenomenon. We don't know how much the extent it could have gone, and I think it tied in a lot of plot lines that we wanted to see. We got Sukuna, who showed us his domain expansion again after a long period of time, and we learned some great information with the fact that Sukuna, using a binding vow, he stopped his domain from having a barrier and has expanded the range. And especially with his ability of Cleave and Dismantle, we show how much destructive force he has, and we got to learn that he can even use these these abilities such as the flames on command. He ended up opening it from what we can see in this black box and used this to overpower Muhuraga, but I mean, it showed Sukuna in his greatness, and it showed why he is, if not Gojo, the strongest in Jujutsu Kaisen at this moment in time. I mean, Sukuna and Gojo, their brief indications of their rampage and moments were beautiful, and this fight was just insane. I mean, I could not believe what I was seeing when I was reading these panels, and I mean just how easily Sukuna destroyed Muhuraga. It hyped up more of why Sukuna is such a dangerous antagonist. And then you get to the concluding part where you see him after the conclusion of his domain, and he brings back Yuji, and we see the collapse of our main character. I mean, it was just heartbreaking moments, and then it led to the insane fight with obviously Yuji against Mahito. But that would be my list, and thank you guys for watching. Obviously, let me know your list, and thank you guys for watching, and make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe.